The moment authority speaks, the room changes without effort. No announcement is needed. No warning is given. People already know who is in charge. The instructor stands where he always stands. He has spoken before. He has been obeyed before. So when he speaks again, no one is surprised. No one asks questions. No one looks confused. The structure is already set. The room has learned this pattern over time. When this person speaks, others listen. When he gives direction, people follow. He does not shout. He does not threaten anyone. He does not explain himself. He states the rule once. That is all it takes. Because the power is not in his voice. The power is in what everyone expects will happen next. As soon as the words leave his mouth, bodies respond. People straighten their backs. Some stop what they were doing. Small movements slow down. Even breathing changes. Eyes turn forward. Attention tightens. No one says, "Yes, sir." No one needs to. Obedience happens quietly. This is how control usually works. Not with pressure, not with force, but with habit. People follow rules because they believe everyone else will follow them too. Everyone in the room understands that the order is not optional. It was spoken clearly. It was spoken in front of others. It came from the person who is expected to be obeyed. That's what gives it weight. That's what makes people comply before thinking. And that is why the next moment feels wrong. Because when something this solid is ignored, the room doesn't know how to react yet. It hasn't caught up. And that delay is where disruption begins. The rule was not made to help Bruce Lee. That is important to understand. On the surface, it sounded reasonable. It sounded like structure. It sounded like order. But underneath, the rule had a purpose. It was meant to keep things under control. The session had a format, a sequence, a pace. Only certain people were allowed to move freely. Only certain people were allowed to demonstrate fully. Everyone else was expected to stay inside the lines. That's how the system stayed stable. If Bruce Lee followed the rule, he would fit neatly into the structure. He would be predictable, easy to manage. No surprises. The rule limited speed. It limited expression. It limited choice. Not openly, quietly. That is how containment usually works. Nothing in the rule said, "You are being restricted," but everything in the rule ensured he could not exceed the space given to him. This mattered because Bruce Lee was different. He was not there to blend in, but the system was not built for people like that. The rule existed to protect hierarchy. Senior figures demonstrated. Others observed. If that order was broken, the structure weakened. So the rule had to be enforced. Not harshly, not aggressively, just consistently. Everyone watching expected Bruce Lee to comply. Not because he had to, but because everyone else always did. That expectation was the real pressure. The rule worked only if no one tested it. And the moment someone did, it stopped being about training. It became about control. Bruce Lee did not respond with words. That is the first thing that stood out. When the rule was stated, there was a short pause. Not for debate, not for thinking, just enough time for everyone to expect compliance. That expectation was strong. Normally, this is where a person nods, steps back, waits. Bruce Lee did none of that. He moved, not slowly, not to test the reaction. He moved right away. The timing mattered. There was no hesitation, no checking faces, no looking at the instructor. His body made the decision before anyone else could. This is what changed the situation. If he had waited, someone might have corrected him. If he had spoken, someone might have argued back. But action closed that space. He did not follow the pattern that had just been set. He did not stay inside the limits that were placed on him. He chose his own movement immediately. People noticed because it happened too fast to interrupt. There was no clear moment to stop him. By the time anyone realized what he was doing, he was already doing it. That speed removed permission from the room. No one had time to decide how to respond. The rule had been broken before enforcement could begin, and that is why it landed so heavily. Not because it was loud, not because it was aggressive, but because it was final. Once the action happened, the room could not rewind. Everything after that had to react to what was already done, and that is when control began to slip. The room reacted before anyone understood what was happening. It did not react loudly. It reacted quietly. Sound dropped. Not all at once, but enough to notice. Someone who had been shifting their feet stopped. Someone who had been breathing loudly became still. Small movements disappeared. No one spoke. This was not planned silence. It arrived on its own. People did not look at each other right away. They looked forward. Then they looked again. Eyes moved carefully. Most of them were not looking at Bruce Lee first. They were looking at the instructor. That is how rooms like this work. When something unexpected happens, people look to authority for the response. But the response did not come. The instructor did not step forward. He did not raise his hand. He did not repeat the rule. He stood still. That stillness was new. Seconds passed. Not many, but enough. Enough for people to feel uncomfortable. Enough for people to realize that the normal pattern had stopped. Some people adjusted their stance without meaning to. A shoulder rolled back. A foot slid slightly away. It was subtle, but it happened because no one knew what to do next. Normally, rules keep people relaxed. They tell everyone where they stand. But now the rule had been crossed, and nothing had filled the space it left behind. That space felt empty, and when space like that opens, attention sharpens. No one whispered. No one laughed to break the tension. Everyone waited. Waiting is a sign. It means people believe a correction should come, and they don't want to be the one caught moving before it does. That waiting stretched the moment. The silence did not feel dramatic. It felt exposed, like the room had paused mid-breath, and everyone felt it. In most situations, silence like this does not last long. Authority usually steps in quickly. A voice fills the space. A command is repeated. A correction is made. That is how order is restored. But this time, nothing happened. The instructor did not move forward. He did not raise his voice. He did not call Bruce Lee's name. That delay mattered. Because the longer authority waits, the harder it becomes to act. Each second made the situation heavier. People were no longer just watching Bruce Lee. They were watching the instructor. Not with disrespect, with uncertainty. They wanted to know what would happen next. Would the rule be enforced? Would the moment be ignored? Would the session stop? No one knew. That uncertainty spread quietly through the room. When people do not know the next step, they protect themselves. They stay still. They stay quiet. They wait. But waiting has a cost. The rule that had just been spoken began to lose strength, not because anyone challenged it again, but because no one acted on it. Rules only work when people believe something will happen if they are broken. Here, nothing happened, and everyone saw that. The silence stopped being neutral. It started saying something. It said the instructor was thinking. It said he was choosing his next move carefully. That alone changed the balance. Authority that has to pause in public is no longer absolute. It becomes visible, And once authority becomes visible, people start noticing its limits. By the time the moment passed, something important had shifted. Not loudly, not officially, but quietly. The rule was still there, but the certainty behind it was gone. And everyone in the room felt it, even if no one spoke. After the silence, the problem was no longer Bruce Lee. The problem was the response. The rule had been broken. That part was done. Now the instructor had to decide what to do next. This is the moment where authority is tested. There were choices available, but none of them were clean. If the instructor corrected Bruce Lee immediately, he would have to do it in front of everyone. That meant raising his voice, or stepping into Bruce Lee's space. Both carried risk. If the correction failed, authority would collapse completely. If the instructor escalated physically, the situation could turn unpredictable. No one wanted that. Another option was to repeat the rule. But repeating a rule after it has been ignored makes it weaker. It shows that the first statement was not enough. People notice that. The instructor could also stop the session, but stopping everything because of one person would look like retreat. It would tell the room that control had been lost. Every option made the situation worse. That is the trap. Authority works best when it does not have to choose. Here, a choice had to be made in public, and everyone was watching. The longer the instructor waited, the more obvious the pressure became. He was not deciding how to punish Bruce Lee. He was deciding how much authority he was willing to risk, and that decision had to happen silently, in front of witnesses, with no safe outcome. As the seconds passed, one option quietly disappeared, the option to act, not because it was impossible, but because it would no longer work the way it was supposed to. Authority depends on timing. When a rule is broken, correction must come immediately. If it comes late, it feels forced. Here, the moment had already stretched too long. If the instructor spoke now, it would sound reactive. If he stepped forward now, it would look like pressure. People would notice. They would feel the strain. And once people sense strain, they stop believing in control. That is why nothing happened. Not because the instructor agreed, not because he approved, but because acting now would expose weakness. Silence became the safest option. By choosing not to respond, the instructor avoided open conflict. But he also gave something up. He gave up the ability to enforce the rule. The rule still existed, but it had lost its edge. Everyone in the room understood this without needing it explained. No one stepped in to support the instructor. No assistant moved. No senior student intervened. Support only comes when authority feels stable. Here, it did not, so the room adjusted. People stopped waiting for correction. They started accepting what they were seeing. Bruce Lee continued without interruption. And, in that quiet acceptance, control shifted. Not because someone took it, but because it was no longer being held. The rule did not disappear. That is important. No one said it was wrong. No one announced a change. On paper, everything stayed the same. But something else changed. Enforcement stopped. And without enforcement, rules become suggestions. This did not happen suddenly. It happened quietly. People in the room noticed that Bruce Lee was not corrected. Then they noticed he was not stopped. That combination mattered. If a rule is broken once and corrected, it survives. If it is broken and ignored, it weakens. Here, it was ignored in front of everyone. That made the rule unstable. Not just for Bruce Lee, for the entire room. People began to understand that nothing would happen. Not later, not quietly, nothing. That realization spread. No one discussed it. No one needed to. People adjust quickly when expectations change. The rule still existed in words, but in practice it was finished. Because rules only work when people believe they will be enforced. And in that moment, belief was gone. What remained was observation. Everyone watched closely, not to see what Bruce Lee would do next, but to confirm that the rule truly had no power left. And with every second that passed without correction, that confirmation became stronger. Once people realized the rule would not be enforced, their behavior changed. Not all at once, not openly, quietly. They stopped expecting interruption. They stopped looking toward the instructor for correction. Their attention shifted. Instead of waiting to see if Bruce Lee would be stopped, they began watching what he was doing. That change mattered. It meant the rule was no longer the focus. Reality was, the instructor was still present. He still had the title. He still stood in the same place. But presence alone is not enforcement. People respect what works. And the rule had stopped working. If someone had spoken up at that point, it would have felt strange, out of place, late. The moment for enforcement had passed. Trying to bring it back would only highlight that it had been lost. Everyone sensed this. That is why no one challenged Bruce Lee afterward, not because they were impressed, not because they were afraid, but because the structure had already adjusted. When enforcement fails once in public, people stop testing it again. They don't need to. They've already seen the outcome. From that moment on, the rule existed only in memory. It was still part of the system, but it no longer shaped behavior. The room had moved on, and authority had to move with it. Because authority that insists after failure does not regain control. It only reveals how much has been lost. After the tension faded, things did not return to how they were before. That is important. On the surface, the session continued. People moved again. The room started to breathe normally. But underneath, behavior had changed. No one addressed Bruce Lee directly anymore. No one corrected his pace. No one reminded him of the earlier rule. This was not discussed. It did not need to be. People adjusted without being told. The instructor continued the session, but his attention moved away from Bruce Lee. That was not avoidance. It was acceptance. When authority stops correcting someone, it signals something to everyone else. It says, "This is no longer worth enforcing." From that point on, Bruce Lee was not treated like a problem. He was treated like a fixed condition, something the room had already adapted to. No one tried to restart the confrontation. No one tried to make a point later, because bringing it up again would reopen a moment that had already ended. And moments like that do not reopen cleanly. The system had made its adjustment, not by changing rules, but by changing behavior. Bruce Lee continued calmly. Others gave him space. No one challenged him because there was no benefit in doing so. The outcome had already been seen. The room had learned what would happen if the rule was tested, and learning like that does not need repetition. It settles in quietly. From that point forward, the situation was stable again, not because control was restored, but because everyone had accepted the new reality. Nothing official changed after that day. There was no announcement, no explanation, no new rule added. On paper, everything stayed the same. The structure remained. The hierarchy remained. But behavior told a different story. From that point on, no one tried to place the same limits on Bruce Lee again. Not directly, not indirectly. People did not remind him of formats. They did not correct his timing. They did not step in front of him. This was not written anywhere. It was understood. Once a rule fails in public, people remember. They remember who was corrected and who was not. They remember what happened when someone acted outside the limits. And they adjust. Bruce Lee did not demand special treatment. He did not claim authority. He simply continued as he had, calm, focused, uninterested in revisiting the moment. That calm mattered. It made the change permanent. If he had reacted emotionally, the situation might have reopened, but he didn't. So the room settled into a new normal, one where the rules still existed, but no longer applied to him. Everyone understood this without speaking, because once enforcement ends, finality arrives quietly, and no one tries again. After time passed, the moment did not fade. It became fixed. People remembered it not as a confrontation, but as a point where something stopped working. No one retold it loudly. No one argued about it, but it stayed in memory. The rules were still taught the same way. The structure still looked the same from the outside. Yet, when Bruce Lee was present, behavior changed. People did not wait for permission to give him space. They gave it automatically, not out of fear, out of understanding. They had already seen what would happen if control was tested. No one wanted to repeat a moment that could not be reversed. The instructor never mentioned the rule to him again. Not later, not in private. Because once authority lets a moment pass, it cannot be reclaimed without loss. And everyone knew that. Bruce Lee did not speak about it afterward. He did not explain himself. He left the situation as it was. That silence completed the shift. There was no challenge left unresolved. No argument waiting to return. The system adjusted and stayed adjusted. The rules stayed the same. The people stayed the same. But enforcement had drawn a line it would not cross again. And that is how the moment ended. Not with noise, not with victory, but with certainty. No one tried to apply the rule to him again.